About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window, which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later in the story. It had 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, friendly guy had issues with his work visa and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but was content with the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off, but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy, but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang out with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for the month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I'm woken up at about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. Roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looks me dead in the eye and says, "So, do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused, because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him, and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room, that he saw me in the side alley out the window, arguing with our landlord, whom I'd never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. After staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time, he says he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time. Had seen me talking with our other roommate, who's in Hawaii, and asking me for the badge number of the officer I'd spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this stuff out, because I'm not doing anything and I don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, please call an ambulance," and leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later. And when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the freak alone and leave for work. I go to work as normal, and I'm reluctant to return that night, but I'm too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. At about 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is packing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door, walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily and slamming the doors. I can see his figure packing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he cannot see inside. Suddenly, he screams, "I can't live like this. Why are you doing this to me?" I think he's on the phone and don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the freak out of there, so I very quietly creep out of the bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I hear you," and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door, but not touching the door itself. I look towards my window and I see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear against the glass. I was freaking terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside my door and not inside my room, so I know that when I leave, I'm going to need a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out of the door again, at which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on and run. As I'm formulating this plan, The pacing stops. He screams, "Do you want to freaking fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight, I swear to God." I'm a very small 5-foot girl. This guy is easily 3 times my size, so I'm definitely not looking to fight. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights, and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure I can't hear any movement, and then decide to take my chance. I took a breath and pulled my door open quickly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later and see him standing shirtless with just a pair of boxers and socks on in the dark of the hallway. His arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no from me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in my hand. I run about half a block barefoot before I stop to put my shoes on. When I look back, he is standing in the porch light of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away, and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so, while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He says he doesn't remember anything that happened, or wasn't sure if it was real or not, but if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sends me a photo of the house key sitting on the table, and says I'm out, nothing else. I take a friend over there with me to scout it out, and then sure that he was actually gone. When we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all of the fire alarms out of the ceiling. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door, and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realized that my front door can only lock by using a key from the outside, and it had been locked when we arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with a chair or other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but I also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been so lucky as I was. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 years old, and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had a jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror, and she owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with that guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run into her room. She would basically spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes, she wouldn't say anything and she would just stand in her hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her, and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looked like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. Another night, I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. I was kind of uneasy getting into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, but she wasn't listening to me when I asked her to turn down the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his freaking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I even pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door close and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back to sleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month later after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between "Hi, how are you?" to "I freaking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. This happened last year around this season, while I was broke and struggling to make ends meet. I had just moved out and didn't want to resort going back to my parents. Anyways, I was so desperate I was looking on Craigslist for caregiver or housekeeping type gigs, just to make some quick cash while I was looking for a full-time position. After responding to several, I got a bite back from a man who had advertised as a disabled man who needed help with his morning and evening routines since he had a bad back. As a past caregiver, I thought nothing of his request to help with bathing and dressing, since I knew it could be difficult for someone like that. After chatting on the phone and coming to the conclusion he was nice and normal, I proceeded to head over to his townhouse late one night to help him with his nighttime routine. He lived a bit out of the way from me, but I was desperate and didn't mind. He even said I could spend the night, since he'd need me in the morning anyways. Once I got there, He was a decent looking man in his late 30s, early 40s with a cane. He'd paid me $200 up front for the expected nighttime and morning routine the next day. He explained he was ex-military and had a back surgery recently. Things started to get weird once he offered me some wine and commented on how cute he thought I was. I should have seen that as a big red flag, but again, I was super poor. But I didn't want to cheat on him, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He then led me to his bedroom, where he got undressed for his evening shower. I was horrified, since I saw that he already had a giant erection and wanted me to lather him up. He asked if I wanted to take my clothes off, and I declined. He responded respectfully. However, he did touch my butt when I bent over to pick something up for him. I should have ran out right then, but I was waiting for the right moment. After quickly giving him the most unsexy shower in the most platonic way I could, he got out and said he was heading to the bed, but didn't want to wear any clothes. The guest room, where I was to stay, was right next to his, and though I was tired, I was still pretty on edge. My gut instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there. The issue was that we were on a 3-story townhouse, and we were on the top floor, and he had installed baby gates on each floor so his cat wouldn't run away. Also, he had turned off all the lights on the lower floors, so it was pitch black. In order for me to get out, I'd have to pass his room. I quietly arranged my stuff in my purse while I heard his TV blaring, and to my horror, I saw him walk swiftly to the bathroom without his cane. I realized he was not as disabled as he had told me, since he had previously put on an act as if he couldn't walk without it. He also still had his heart on and was holding a giant bottle of lotion with him. As quickly and quietly as I could, I fled and ran like hell out of that room while he was in the bathroom and jumped like an Olympic sprinter over the cat gates down the dark stairs. As I threw the front door open to run to my car, I heard his house alarm go off. I got into my car as fast as lightning, heart beating like crazy. I immediately got phone calls from his number, and every car that trailed me had me terrified until I got out of there. Finally, after a 2-hour drive, I was back to my place and grateful I was out there. Who knows what could have happened if I had stayed there overnight, but I didn't want to stay to find out.